Recovery room. 11 p.m. Eleanor had just survived an emergency C-section at 31 weeks. Three baby boys, barely 2 pounds each, were on ventilators behind a glass wall, and she hadn't even had the chance to touch a single tiny hand. Then the door opened. Carter walked in, eyes still glued to his phone. No knock, and set a brown envelope on the bedside table with the indifference of a man closing out a business meeting. "Sign that," he said, without bothering to look at her. "Before the anesthesia fully wears off, it'll be easier that way." Eleanor looked at her husband, voice barely a rasp. "Carter, what is this?" "Divorce papers. Effective this morning." The monitor kept beeping steadily. Nurse Carol in the corner involuntarily covered her mouth. "I married you," Carter said, looking her straight in the face, his voice as cold as reading a financial report, "because you were useful. And that time is over now." But what he didn't know, the woman lying in that hospital bed was no longer the person he thought she was. This is the story of how Eleanor Whitmore took everything back one piece at a time. Follow now so you don't miss what comes next. The sky over Westport was the particular shade of gray that comes just before dawn, decides whether to be beautiful or brutal. I was standing at the guest room window when his headlights swept across the lawn. Not because I had been waiting. I had stopped waiting for Daniel Harmon approximately 6 weeks, 4 days, and 11 hours before that morning. I was standing there because I wanted to see his face before he had a chance to arrange it. He pulled into the driveway slowly, careful, the way a man drives when he is rehearsing something. I watched him sit in the car for almost 2 full minutes before the door opened. He stepped out in yesterday's clothes, his jacket over one arm, his hair recently smoothed with his fingers in the way he always did when he thought no one was watching. He looked up at the house. His expression, in that half second before he composed it, was not guilt. It was not even regret. It was the face of a man calculating odds. I stepped back from the window. "My name is Claire Bennett Harmon. I am 38 years old. I am 7 months pregnant with a daughter I have already named, already loved, already made promises to in the dark of nights when sleep would not come and the house felt like a stage set for a life I did not recognize. I am a landscape architect. I designed 3 of the most photographed rooftop gardens on the New York skyline. And I understand, in a way most people do not, that the most important thing about any structure is not how it looks from the outside. It is which walls are load-bearing and which ones are just for show." For 8 years, I had been living inside a house built entirely of show walls. And that morning, as Daniel came in through the front door and called my name in the soft, practiced tone that meant he was already spinning the story, I was not standing at the door waiting for an explanation. I was standing in the kitchen with my hands around a mug of tea, watching the steam curl upward, thinking about a filing cabinet in his office and a key I had copied 8 days earlier. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was freshly concerned. That is the best way I can describe it. The way his eyebrows arranged themselves into worry. The way he said my name again. Softer this time. "Sweetheart." Like I was something fragile he needed to handle carefully. I looked at him. He smelled like someone else. Not aggressively. Just underneath the surface. The way a lie lives underneath a careful sentence. "You didn't come to bed," he said. "I was at the hospital," I said. He blinked. Just once. Just enough for me to see the recalibration happening behind his eyes. "What? When? Why didn't you call me?" "I called you 4 times, I said. "Your voicemail picked up on the second ring." He opened his mouth, closed it, then found his angle. "My phone died. I was at the Henderson dinner." "I'm so sorry." "Claire, I had no idea. I drove myself," I said. "The baby is fine." The relief that moved across his face was real. I will give him that. He did not want his daughter harmed. He just did not want to be present for the inconvenience of her arrival. "Thank God," he said. He crossed the kitchen and put his hands on my shoulders and looked at my face with the specific expression of a man performing love for an audience of one. "You should have kept calling. You should have had someone drive you." "There was no one to call," I said. "You were unavailable." Something tightened in his jaw. Just briefly. "I feel terrible about this." "I know," I said, and I turned back to my tea. "I want to tell you what I knew, in that moment. Standing in my own kitchen in the gray Connecticut dawn, watching my husband perform remorse with the skill of someone who had been practicing for years. I want to tell you what it feels like to know the truth and hold it carefully, the way you hold a piece of broken glass. Not to wound someone with it yet, just to keep it close, where you can see it clearly. I knew about the hotel on Park Avenue, the champagne service for 2 on a Sunday in October when I had been home with a head cold and a bowl of soup. I knew about the number saved in his phone as Darren from IT, a name belonging to no one in his firm. I knew about the 4 late-night rides from a building 3 blocks from his office. I knew about the jeweler charge in September, not our anniversary. Not my birthday. I had known. In the way women who have learned to doubt their own knowing always know. Quietly, privately. In the middle of the night, I had known, and then I had talked myself out of knowing, and then something in me had simply stopped cooperating with the not knowing, and I had started writing things down. Dates, times, amounts, addresses, a private document on my phone, behind a passcode Daniel did not know. 6 weeks of careful, quiet truth. This is where Claire's story really begins. Not with the morning Daniel came home smelling like someone else, but 6 weeks before. When I finally stopped being afraid of what I might find and started being more afraid of what would happen if I never looked. Because here is what I want you to understand. If you are someone who has ever stood in a kitchen holding a mug and watching a person you loved perform love back at you from behind a carefully constructed face, the instinct that something is wrong is not hysteria. It is not sensitivity. It is not the symptom of a woman who is, as Daniel had been telling me for 3 years, too emotional for her own good. It is information. And information, when you treat it carefully, when you document it and protect it, and do not let it be rewritten by someone who needs you not to know what you know, becomes something else entirely. It becomes power, not the kind of power that shouts, not the kind that throws things or makes scenes in driveways. The kind that sits quietly in a kitchen at 6 in the morning and says, simply, I called you 4 times, and then turns back to her tea. That morning, Daniel made himself toast and told me about the Henderson dinner, and I listened and I did not confront him, and I did not cry, and I did not ask about the perfume I could still smell from 3 feet away. I waited until he went upstairs to shower, and then I went to his office, and I opened the filing cabinet. And I started reading. Let me take you back, because this story, like every story worth telling, does not begin at its loudest moment. It begins in the small, quiet places where a person decides to trust themselves. 6 weeks before Daniel came home at dawn, I was sitting at my drafting table in the second bedroom we had converted to a studio. It was a Wednesday. 11:45 at night. I was 31 weeks pregnant, sketching revisions for a client proposal I no longer had a client for, because 18 months earlier I had been let go from Hayden and Reed Landscape Architecture in what my former boss Carol Sutton had called a budget restructuring. I had believed her. I had been devastated by it. The Meridian Project, which I had designed over the course of 14 months. The rooftop garden that I had built from grief and late nights and dirt-smudged sketching paper, had been reassigned. Carol had said it was not approved. I had believed that too. But I am getting ahead of myself. That Wednesday night, Daniel was allegedly at a client dinner. He had been at a client dinner 3 Wednesdays in a row. He had also been at a client dinner the Sunday I found the hotel receipt, which I discovered when I reached into the pocket of his winter coat to borrow his gloves because I could not find mine. The Langham, Suite 412. Champagne service for 2. That Sunday, I had been home with a cold and a bowl of soup and an old episode of a home renovation show I had already seen twice. I had stood in the front hallway holding that receipt for a long time. Then I had photographed it with my phone. Then I had put it back exactly where I found it. This is the part that surprised even me. I did not cry. I did not pace. I went back to the couch and I finished my soup and I thought, with a clarity that felt almost frightening, that I needed to know the shape of the whole thing before I moved a single piece of it. The following Monday, I called a family law attorney named Sandra Howell. I found her through a friend of a friend, someone who had no connection to Daniel's professional world. I told her I might need help. I did not tell Daniel. Sandra said, do not confront him yet. Document everything. And she gave me a list. Over the next 6 weeks, I followed that list. I pulled our shared account statements and photographed every charge I did not recognize. There were 11, over 8 months. Hotels, a jeweler, 2 restaurant charges for $300 each on nights. Daniel had told me he worked late. I noted the number saved as Darren from IT, and I ran it through a reverse lookup service Sandra recommended. It belonged to a woman. I did not know her name yet. I drove past Daniel's office building on a Thursday night at 10 p.m. and saw his car in the parking garage. I photographed the timestamp on my phone. I found the hotel key card in the inner pocket of his gym bag when I was doing laundry. The Langham again, a different date. I photographed all of it. And then, 8 days before the morning, everything cracked. I did the one thing that would matter most. I had a copy made of the small brass key on Daniel's keychain, the one that opened the locked filing cabinet in his home office. He had told me, years ago, that the cabinet held client documents, confidential materials. He needed it locked for professional reasons. I had never questioned this. I had never had reason to. Now I had reason, but I waited, because Sandra had been very clear. Do not open that cabinet until you are ready to act on what you find. Because once he knows you know, everything changes. So I waited. I collected. I slept beside him at night with the information filed neatly in the back of my mind. And I smiled at the right moments, and I did not flinch when he touched my shoulder. And I watched him practice being my husband the way I had once watched architecture students practice their presentations. Confident on the outside, fundamentally unsure of the structure underneath. I want to pause here, because I know that some of you listening to this are living inside a version of this story right now. Maybe not this exact version. Maybe the details are different. Maybe it is not a hotel receipt. Maybe it is a changed password, a turned-away phone screen, a shift in how he speaks to you when other people are around versus when you are alone. Whatever the detail, here is what attorneys and domestic abuse advocates have said. Consistently, across thousands of cases, documentation is protection. Not because you are building a case for war, but because the truth has a way of being buried by people who have been burying things for a long time. Dates, times, screenshots, photographs, a private journal on a device with a passcode they do not know, a personal email account on a browser you clear afterward. You are not being paranoid. You are being precise. And precision, in situations like this, is what keeps you safe. Back to Claire. The night of November 14th was a Tuesday. Daniel said he would be home by 9. At 10:30, I sent a text asking if he was on his way. 3 dots appeared and disappeared. No response. At 11, the dizziness started, not the ordinary tiredness of late pregnancy. This was different. This was the room tilting, my vision going soft at the edges. I sat on the bathroom floor with my back against the cool tile and I called Daniel. Once, twice. Voicemail on the second ring. I texted, "I am dizzy and I am scared. Please come home." 3 dots. Gone. I called my neighbor Carol Walters. No answer. I called my OB, Dr. Patricia Shaw. She answered on the third ring. Bless her. And she was calm and clear. If the dizziness does not pass in 30 minutes, go to New York Presbyterian. Do not wait. It did not pass. I put on my coat. I drove myself to the hospital with both hands on the wheel, talking to my daughter the entire way. Not praying. Exactly. More like narrating. We are on the Merritt Parkway. We are taking the exit now. We are going to be fine. She kicked once on the highway, gently, as if agreeing. I have thought about that kick many times since. New York Presbyterian at midnight is its own kind of world. The particular fluorescent quiet of a hospital that never fully sleeps. The triage nurse who looked at my face and my belly and moved me to the front of the line without being asked. The monitors they attached. The sound of my daughter's heartbeat on the screen. Steady and loud and completely unbothered by the catastrophe her mother's life was quietly becoming. The contractions were stress-induced, not labor. The baby was fine. I was released at 6:15 in the morning. I sat in my car in the parking garage for a moment, keys in my hand, and I thought about the past 7 hours, alone in the hospital. No one in the waiting room chair beside me. No one holding my hand during the monitoring. No one to drive me home. I thought about Sophie, the baby we lost 2 years ago, and the hospital visit after that loss, and how Daniel had been there that time, how he had held my hand and cried and told me we would get through it together. I thought about how much had changed since then. I did not cry in the parking garage. I had made a quiet agreement with myself, somewhere around 2 in the morning, that I was saving my tears for something more useful than an empty seat. I gathered my bag and I started walking toward the lobby exit. I made it approximately 20 feet before my vision went white. I had time to think. Not now, not here. Before my legs simply stopped cooperating. I slumped against a column near the sliding doors, and I heard someone say, very calmly and without any drama at all, "I have got you. Do not stand. Just breathe." His name, I would learn shortly after, was Weston Gray. He was leaving an early board meeting at the hospital foundation. He was wearing a suit that cost more than I wanted to think about, and he had a calm, unhurried manner that I would come to think of as his most consistent quality, the ability to be useful without making a performance of it. He did not hover over me. He crouched to my level. He asked 3 questions. Are you all right? Do you need a doctor? Is there someone I can call? When I said my husband was not answering, he did not offer an expression of sympathy or judgment or curiosity. He simply nodded once, the way people do when they have understood something without needing it explained. And he said, "My driver is outside. I will make sure you get home." He sat with me until I could stand without the room tilting. He got me water from a nurse's station. He did not ask what had brought me to the hospital or why I was alone or anything that required me to explain myself to a stranger at 6 in the morning. He just stayed, quietly, until I was steady. His driver took us to Westport. Weston sat across from me in the back of a town car that smelled like leather and something faintly cedar, and he asked if I was warm enough. And then we rode in silence that was not uncomfortable, which I noted because I had forgotten that silence could be that way. When the car turned into my street, I saw Daniel's car in the driveway. He was home. I processed this in the 3 seconds before the car stopped. He had come home after I stopped texting. Or perhaps he had been home for hours. I did not know. What I knew was that he had not called back. He had not gone to the hospital. He had not done the one thing that even a mediocre husband would have done. Weston stepped out first and walked around to open my door. He offered a hand for balance. And that is the moment Daniel came out the front door. He was in his clothes from the night before. He had clearly not slept. He looked at the car, at Weston, at me, and I watched his face move through 4 emotions in approximately 2 seconds: guilt, calculation, possessiveness. Then the performance settled over everything like a curtain dropping, and he came toward us with his shoulders back and his voice calibrated to controlled concern. "Claire, what is going on?" "She nearly collapsed in the hospital lobby," Weston said. His tone was not aggressive. It was simply factual. "The way you state something that is true. I made sure she got home safely." Daniel looked at him. A different kind of look now. Territorial. "I appreciate that," he said in a voice that appreciated nothing. "I will take it from here." He reached for my arm. I stepped back slightly, not dramatically, just enough. "I need a moment," I said. Daniel's eyes moved to mine. He was searching for something, the softness he was accustomed to finding there. Probably the yielding. The part of me that had spent 8 years smoothing things over, keeping the peace, deciding that the argument was not worth the cost. He did not find what he was looking for. "We should go inside," he said. "You need rest." "In a minute," I said. I turned to Weston. I thanked him. I meant it. He nodded once, told me to take care of myself, and looked at me for a moment with an expression that was neither romantic nor pitying but simply clear. The way someone looks at you when they see you accurately. And I thought, I cannot remember the last time anyone looked at me that way. The car pulled away. Daniel and I stood in the driveway in the early November morning, and the lavender I had planted along the walkway was frost-tipped, and the neighborhood was utterly still. "How long has that been going on?" Daniel said. The question was so predictably him that I almost smiled. "I met him 40 minutes ago," I said. "He kept me from falling on a hospital floor because you did not answer my calls. My phone died." The voicemail timestamp says the second ring. His jaw flexed. "I am going inside to rest," I said. "I will be in the guest room." I walked past him up the front path. I did not look back, and I went directly, not to the guest room, but to his office, where a brass key was waiting in my coat pocket. The office smelled like him. Leather chair, a trace of the cedar cologne he had worn since before we were married. Diplomas on the wall, a photograph of the two of us at our wedding on the bookshelf, positioned where clients would see it during video calls. Claire and Daniel Harmon, year 5 of marriage. The photo taken 6 months before the first pregnancy, 6 months before everything that came after. I looked at it for a moment. The woman in that photograph was so certain about her life. I sat down at his desk and I unlocked the filing cabinet. The folders were organized by category: client work, financial, medical, tax records. I had not known there was a medical folder. I pulled it out. There were 2 sections inside, separated by a paper clip. The first section was mine, routine things, insurance forms, my annual exam records, and behind those, a folder labeled simply with one word: Sophie, our first baby, the pregnancy we lost at 6 months, the hemorrhage, the hospital, the grief that had changed both of us. Daniel by hardening him, me by cracking me open in ways I had spent 2 years slowly climbing out of. I had never seen this folder. Daniel had told me the hospital records were incomplete, that there had been a paperwork mix-up, that he had tried to get copies and been told the file was incomplete due to a system error. I believed him, because he was my husband, and because I was grieving, and not in the habit of interrogating the logistics of my own medical history. I opened the folder. The discharge summary from October 21st, 2 years earlier. I read the attending physician's note first. High risk of hemorrhage. Overnight monitoring strongly recommended. Standard protocol for this presentation. Then I read the margin note, handwritten by a nurse in blue ink. The kind of note that ends up in a file because someone wanted a record. Family declined further monitoring. Husband signed AMA discharge. AMA against medical advice. I read it again slowly. The words did not change. Daniel had signed me out of the hospital. When I was sedated, when I could not sit upright, let alone read a form or make a decision or understand what was being asked, He had signed a document that removed me from medical monitoring during a high-risk hemorrhage situation. And then he had brought me home, and Sophie had not survived. And he had held my hand and cried with me and told me that some tragedies just happen, that the doctors said nothing could have been done, that we had to accept it and move forward. He had said those words to me, looking directly at my face, while holding the knowledge that he had made a choice I did not know about, a choice that had never been offered to me. I sat in his desk chair for a very long time. I am not going to tell you that I felt rage, not yet. Rage requires a kind of energy that I did not have in that moment. What I felt was something older and heavier than rage. It was a rearrangement. The way everything you thought you understood about the structure of your life shifts when one load-bearing wall turns out to be decoration. I photographed every page in the folder. Then I kept looking. The second section of the medical folder held something I did not expect. A power of attorney document, dated 3 weeks before Sophie's due date, granting Daniel full authority over my medical decisions in the event of emergency incapacitation. My signature was at the bottom. I did not remember signing it. I studied my signature carefully, the way the letters connected, the slight leftward lean I always have. It looked like my handwriting, but I had been on bed rest during those final weeks. I had been exhausted and frightened and signing whatever Daniel put in front of me with the blind trust of a woman who had never had reason not to trust her husband. I took photographs of everything. Then I moved to the financial folder. It took me 11 minutes to understand what I was looking at. And when I did, the room did not tilt the way it had in the hospital lobby. It simply became very still, very clear. There were account statements for an account I did not know existed. In my name, my social security number, my signature on the opening documents. Over 14 months, $43,000 had moved through that account in small increments, monthly transfers of $400 to $800, sent to the same recipient each time. I did not recognize the name on the receiving end. Not yet. I photographed everything. And then I sat there in the gray morning light of my husband's office, surrounded by the evidence of a life built on decisions he had made without me, for me, around me. And I did what Sandra Howell had told me to do when I reached this point. I called her. She answered on the second ring. "I am ready," I said. "What did you find?" she said. I told her. There was a brief silence on Sandra's end. Not surprise. Exactly. More like a professional absorbing information and organizing it into categories of urgency. "Claire," she said, "I need you to check something right now. Pull up the property records for your home address." I did it on my phone, still sitting in his chair. The entry took a moment to load. Sale agreement pending. Listed November 2nd. I stared at the screen. November 2nd was 12 days ago. "There is a co-signature," Sandra said carefully. "From you, dated October 28th. October 28th. I had been at my mother's house in Richmond, Virginia for the entire Columbus Day weekend. Daniel had driven me to the train station himself. He had kissed me goodbye on the platform and told me to give his love to my mother. That is not my signature," I said. "I know," Sandra said, "which means we have forgery on medical documents, forgery on property documents, and an unauthorized account in your name, Claire. This is bigger than a divorce." I heard Daniel's footsteps on the stairs. I closed the filing cabinet. I walked to the window. I made myself breathe. "What do I do right now?" I said, very quietly. "You do nothing that tells him what you know," Sandra said. "You need 48 hours. Can you give me 48 hours? "Yes," I said. I hung up. I walked out of the office and into the hallway, and I almost collided with Daniel, who was coming from the bedroom in fresh clothes, his hair damp, looking like a man who had solved the problem of last night simply by showering. "I made coffee," he said. "Come downstairs. Let us talk." "Thank you," I said. And I followed him down. Because the most important thing I had learned, in 6 weeks of quiet documentation, was this: the moment you reveal your hand, the other person starts moving. And Daniel Harmon had spent 8 years making decisions around me without my knowledge. I was not going to give him a single extra hour to do it again. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. Have you ever sat across from someone you love, or someone you used to love, or someone you are only now understanding you were never fully seen by, and maintained a perfectly ordinary conversation, while knowing something that would change everything if you said it out loud? It requires a very particular kind of stillness. Not the stillness of someone who does not care. The stillness of someone who cares so much that they have moved past panic into something that functions like clarity. I sat across from Daniel at our kitchen island. I drank his coffee. I answered his questions about the hospital visit. I let him be concerned and attentive and present in the way he was always capable of being when he thought he needed to manage my impression of him. He told me he had lost track of time at a work event, that he felt terrible, that I should have called more, should have been more insistent, that his phone had been unreliable lately. I said, I understand. He reached across the island and covered my hand with his. I did not pull away. Because every second I sat there, Sandra Howell was working, and Dr. Patricia Shaw's office would open at 8 a.m. And the woman I'd been for the past 6 weeks, the woman who photographed hotel receipts and copied filing cabinet keys and opened private accounts on browsers she cleared afterward, that woman was more prepared than Daniel Harmon had ever imagined his wife was capable of being. He thought I was the woman from 8 years ago, warm, trusting, willing to forgive, wanting desperately to believe in the story we had built together. He did not know that woman had quietly been replaced. Somewhere around the time I sat on a bathroom floor at 7 months pregnant and counted 4 voicemail tones and understood, in my bones, that I was alone in a marriage that had only been performing itself for years. After Daniel went to his office to take a call, I went upstairs. I texted Sandra a single message. The coffee is terrible. This was our prearranged signal that I was inside and functioning and did not need emergency intervention. She texted back, received, stay steady. Call me at noon. I lay down on the guest room bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about the nursery down the hall. We had painted it soft yellow in September. I had spent 3 weekends choosing the exact right shade. Daniel had supervised from the doorway, making suggestions I mostly did not take. There was a crib we had assembled together on a Sunday afternoon. Daniel reading the instructions, me holding the pieces. Both of us pretending to be the kind of couple that assembled furniture together on Sunday afternoons. The rocking chair I had wanted was not there. Daniel had said it was unnecessary. He had said we should wait. He said I always overspent, that I did not understand money the way he did. I thought he was spending our money at the Langham while telling me I did not understand money. I slept for 2 hours. When I woke up, there was a message from a number I did not recognize. I stared at the preview line for a long moment before I opened it. It said, "This is Carol Sutton. I worked with you at Hayden and Reed. I owe you something I should have given you a long time ago. Can you call me?" Carol had been my project lead, my boss for 4 years. The woman who had handed me a cardboard box of my belongings 18 months ago and told me, carefully, that budget restructuring meant they had to let me go. I had believed her. I had gone home and cried for 3 days and then forced myself back to freelance work because sitting still had felt unbearable. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, Daniel had been extra kind to me, attentive, present, and I had been so relieved to feel him close that I had not thought too hard about the timing. I called her back immediately. Carol answered on the first ring. Her voice was different from how I remembered it, hollowed out by something, the particular flatness of a person who has been carrying a guilt they have finally decided to put down. "Claire," she said, "I am so sorry. I should have called sooner. I did not know the full story until this week." She told me that Daniel had contacted 2 senior partners at Hayden and Reed, not once, twice. He had provided a written statement suggesting I was experiencing serious mental health deterioration, that I was becoming a liability risk, that he was seeking help for me quietly, and that they should protect themselves professionally by restructuring my position. He had sent documentation, a letter on what appeared to be firm letterhead, signed by someone she had assumed was a doctor, stating that I had voluntarily requested reduced responsibilities due to psychological strain. "There is no doctor who signed that," Carol said. "We had a handwriting analyst look at it this week. It was typed in a font that mimics a letterhead. We do not know how he produced it, but it is fabricated." I sat on the edge of the guest room bed. "The Meridian Project," I said. Silence on her end. "Carol," I said, "tell me about the Meridian Project." I heard her exhale, long and unsteady. "The client approved your design," she said. "Daniel called them directly. He told them you had suffered a breakdown and had voluntarily withdrawn from the project. He told them the firm would be assigning a junior associate to complete the work. He sent them a letter with your name on it, confirming you were stepping away." The bedroom tilted, not the way it had at the hospital. This was different. This was the kind of tilt that happens when the floor you thought was solid turns out to have been built over nothing. "It was featured in Architectural Digest 4 months ago," Carol said. "Someone on the design team came to me last week. They had a crisis of conscience. They told me what happened. We have been doing an internal review since then. My design, my 14 months of work, my grief built, late night sketched, dirt under my fingernails vision for a rooftop garden that would make a Manhattan building breathe. Featured in Architectural Digest with someone else's name on it. Because my husband had made a phone call. There is more," Carol said. I closed my eyes. "The client wants to relaunch. They are beginning an expansion. They asked for the original designer specifically. They remember the vision. They know the plan came from you. She paused. The development is $14 million, Claire. And the developer is asking whether you are available. I sat very still with that information. $14 million. My design. My name. The career he had tried to bury. Coming back up through the ground like something planted that refuses not to grow. Tell them yes, I said. My voice did not shake. Tell them I need until February to confirm. But tell them yes. After I hung up, I placed both hands on my belly, gently, the way I had started doing when I needed to feel something real. She kicked, low and firm and certain. I know, I said out loud. To my daughter, to myself, to the gray November light coming through the guest room window. I know, downstairs. I could hear Daniel on a work call, his voice carrying the particular pitch he used when he was performing competence for an audience. Smooth, authoritative, sure of himself. For a moment I felt the old pull. The part of me that had spent years softening around his certainty because it had felt, at the beginning, like safety, like being protected. Now I understood what it actually was. It was erasure. Just very politely done. I stood up. I washed my face. I went downstairs and made myself a second cup of tea. And I waited for the next piece of the truth to arrive. It arrived at 2:47 in the afternoon, in the form of a phone call from a number with a New Haven area code. Daniel was in his office with the door closed. I was in the living room with a book I had not been reading for the past hour. I answered. Is this Claire Harmon? Not a question. The voice was careful, female, trying very hard to sound steady. Yes, I said. A breath. Long enough that I thought the call might end. My name is Rachel Owens. I am going to say something and I need you to know that I am not calling to hurt you. I have been trying to reach you for almost a year and every attempt I made was intercepted. I only found out today that you did not know. That he told you nothing. I set down my book very slowly. I have a son, Rachel Owens said. He is 27 months old. His name is Owen. His father is Daniel Harmon. The living room was very quiet. Outside, a crow moved through the oak tree by the driveway. I watched it. I needed something to look at that was real and outside of this moment. How long, I said. We were together for 18 months. He told me he was separated. He told me you knew. That you had agreed to keep things quiet for the sake of the house sale. He said. She stopped, gathered herself. He said a lot of things that I now understand were designed to keep me from contacting you directly. I thought. Of course he did. He is very good at designing things. When I had Owen and asked for support, Rachel continued. He agreed. Monthly payments. I thought it was coming from a joint account he set up. I did not know whose name was on it until a friend helped me do a financial background search last month. Claire, the account has your name on it. Your social security number. All the support payments for the past 2 years look like they came from you. And there it was. The final architecture of the thing. Not just an affair. Not just forgery. Not just stolen career. Stolen medical consent. Stolen savings. He had made it look like I was paying child support for his secret child. If any of this had ever been investigated before I knew about it, the paper trail pointed directly at me. The complicit wife. Covering up her husband's affair. Managing the hush money quietly. I was the fall person for a life he had built entirely around himself. Rachel, I said, very quietly. Where are you right now? My apartment. In New Haven. I need you to call a woman named Sandra Howell. She is an attorney. I am going to text you her number the moment we hang up. Do not tell Daniel you have spoken to me. Do not respond to any contact from him tonight. And if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you call Sandra immediately. Silence. Then, you believe me? Yes, I said. I have the account statements. I just did not know your name. She let out a sound that was halfway between relief and grief. I understood it completely. I texted her Sandra's number. I sat on the couch in my beautiful showroom living room with the tasteful throw pillows and the marble surfaces that Daniel had chosen because they photographed well when clients visited. And I let myself feel, for exactly 3 minutes, the full weight of it. The affair, the child, the erased career, the stolen medical decisions, the forged signatures, the account in my name, the house being sold without my knowledge. 8 years. 8 years of a marriage that had been a production. And I had been the set decoration. I gave myself 3 minutes. Then I called Sandra. He has a child, I said, when she answered. A pause. The account, she said. Yes. Claire, her voice was careful and firm in equal measure. I need you to listen to me very carefully. This changes the scope significantly. What he has done with that account could constitute financial fraud and identity theft in addition to the forgery charges. But it also means that if he discovers you have been in contact with Rachel Owens, he will panic. And panicking men make their worst decisions. What do I do? I said. Tonight. You do nothing different. Tomorrow morning, you are going to tell him you need to visit your mother in Richmond for a few days for stress reasons related to the pregnancy. You pack a bag, and then we move. I looked out the window at the lavender along the walkway. And the house. I said, the house is not your house right now, Sandra said. It is evidence. I thought. I planted that lavender. I chose that color for the living room. I spent 3 weekends on the nursery yellow. Then I thought, it is just a building. And I know better than most people that the ones built wrong eventually fall. All right, I said. Tomorrow morning. I want to tell you something about the particular Thursday night that followed, because it contains a moment I think about often. A moment that, in retrospect, contains everything important about why some people choose silence and others eventually choose truth. Daniel came out of his office at 7 p.m. He was in a good mood, expansive, the kind of mood that comes from a day of things going right in the private world he had been building alongside our marriage. He suggested we order from the Italian place on Post Road, the one I had loved in the first year of our marriage. He poured himself a glass of wine. He asked about my back pain. He told me, with complete sincerity, that he was glad I was home safe. I ordered the pasta I used to love. I asked about his day. He talked for 45 minutes about a case his firm was handling. And I listened and nodded and was the woman he believed I still was. And across the table from me was the man who had signed my name on a house sale agreement while I slept. And I ate every bite of that pasta because I was 7 months pregnant and I needed the calories, and I was not going to let him take my appetite too. The next morning I told him I wanted to see my mother, that the stress of the hospital visit had unsettled me, that I thought a few days in Richmond would help. He encouraged me immediately. Looking back, I understand why. Rachel Owens had also called him that morning. She had, despite my instructions, told him she had spoken with someone. She had not said my name. But Daniel was intelligent and paranoid in equal measure, and the fact that Rachel had moved at all had put him on alert. He wanted me out of the house. He hugged me at the front door. He said, "Take care of yourself. Give your mother my love." I took the train. I sat in my window seat for the 4-hour ride to Richmond, and I texted Sandra a single word: moving. What I did not know, in that moment, was that while I was on the train watching Connecticut blur into New York blur into New Jersey, Daniel was back at the house opening his own filing cabinet, finding things slightly out of alignment, noticing the small imprecision that an 8-year study of another person makes visible. He knew, not the full shape of what I knew, but enough. The panic started there. Sandra called me in Richmond on Friday afternoon. "He has been calling Rachel," she said, "twice this morning." She did not answer. But Claire, he also called Hayden and Reed. "Carol, he is trying to find out what she told you." She did not confirm anything, but he knows something has shifted. Sandra's voice was steady but urgent. "I am filing the fraud documentation with the district attorney's office Monday morning, but we need to move you before then. Not to your mother's. Somewhere he cannot find you easily. I do not have anywhere," I began. "Weston Gray called my office this morning," Sandra said. I went quiet. "He wanted to know if you were safe. He asked if there was anything he could provide. Claire, he has a private property in Stamford. Security staff. No public listing. He offered it before I could ask. I thought about the man who had crouched to my level in a hospital lobby and asked 3 questions without making me feel small for needing help. Tell him yes," I said, "what I want you to understand about this moment, because I know some of you will have the same instinct I had. The instinct that says I cannot accept help. I cannot be beholden to someone. I must handle this myself. Is that accepting the right help at the right moment is not weakness. It is strategy." Sandra drove me to Stamford on Saturday morning. The townhouse was clean and quiet and stocked with food I had not bought. Security staff at the door and driveway. A guest room with good light and a bed with a mattress that did not smell like Daniel's cedar cologne. I unpacked my overnight bag. I set my drafting pencils on the desk by the window. I felt, for the first time in longer than I could calculate, like I was somewhere I could actually breathe. I was home for exactly 22 minutes before everything accelerated. Sandra was with me in the living room when her phone rang. She answered, listened for 30 seconds, and her expression shifted into something I had not seen on her before. Controlled alarm. "What?" I said, before she even hung up. "Daniel filed an emergency petition this afternoon," she said. "He is requesting temporary conservatorship over medical decisions for the unborn child, based on what he is calling a documented history of emotional instability." The words arrived one at a time. Conservatorship. Medical decisions. His authority. Over my daughter. Before she was even born. I had been afraid of many things over the past 6 weeks. The hotel receipts. The filing cabinet. The account in my name. The secret child. The lost career. I had not been afraid of this. And it was. I understood in that moment. The thing he had been saving. The final move of a man who had run out of quieter options. He was not trying to win the marriage anymore. He was trying to control what happened to my child. I sat down on the couch in Weston Gray's guest property in Stamford, Connecticut, and I did what I had not allowed myself to do since November 14th. I put my face in my hands, and I cried, not quietly, the real kind, the kind that comes from below the ribs. I let it happen for 3 minutes. Then I heard my own voice, the one I had used on the highway at midnight, talking to my daughter. We are on the Merritt Parkway. We are taking the exit now. We are going to be fine. I wiped my face. I picked up my phone. I called Dr. Patricia Shaw. Dr. Patricia Shaw had been my OB for 3 years. She had monitored my second pregnancy with the attentiveness of someone who understood, without my having to explain it, that this baby represented something beyond biology. She had been at the hospital the night I called from the Merritt Parkway. She had personally checked my chart at 2 in the morning. She had told the resident on duty that I was her patient and that she would be reviewing everything before discharge. She answered my call on the second ring. I told her about the conservatorship petition. There was a pause. Then her voice became something I had not heard from her before, not the gentle clinical warmth she used in appointments. Something more angular, more certain. I will have a counter-declaration on Sandra's desk in 1 hour, she said. I have monitored this pregnancy for 31 weeks, Claire. I have documentation of every visit, every vital sign, every conversation. There is no clinical basis for that petition, and I will say so under oath. There is something else, I said. I told her about the AMA discharge form. Sophie, October 21st, 2 years ago. The pause that followed was longer. I filed a complaint with the hospital ethics board after that discharge, she said quietly. Did you know that? I did not. The board closed the case because Daniel provided a statement saying you had agreed to leave. I did not believe it. I kept a note in your file. She paused. It says patient appeared sedated and non-responsive at time of discharge. Husband was sole communicating party. Recommend review. She had written it down 2 years ago. Waiting. That note, I said, can it be retrieved? It never left, she said. I have kept your complete file under a secondary lock since that day. I did not know why I was waiting. I just knew I was. Sometimes the people who protect you do it before you even know you need protecting. Sandra filed the counter-declaration at 5 p.m. A judge reviewed the conservatorship petition and the counter-declaration that evening. By 7 a.m. Sunday, the petition was dismissed. But Daniel did not know that yet. At 10 p.m. Saturday, one of Weston's security staff knocked on the guest room door. Mr. Gray would like you to know there are 2 individuals at the south perimeter, the officer said. One has been identified from vehicle registration as Daniel Harmon. Rachel, sitting on the couch across from me, wrapped her arms tighter around Owen, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder. She had arrived 3 hours earlier, unannounced, shaking on the front step in a worn coat, holding her son, having slipped out the back stairs of her New Haven apartment. When she heard someone in the lobby, she did not recognize asking for her unit number. She had looked directly into the door camera and said, very quietly, he knows I talked, and he is coming. Now he was here. Weston appeared in the hallway, phone already at his ear, voice low and precise. I am going to need the full team at the Stamford property. Yes, right now. He hung up. He looked at me. We have maybe 10 minutes, he said. I need you and Rachel and Owen in the secure room at the end of the hall. The secure room was a reinforced interior space with steel lock mechanisms. The kind of room that exists in buildings where the owner has thought carefully about safety, not because he expects trouble, but because he understands that preparation is different from paranoia. Rachel moved first, carrying Owen. I followed. Through the front security monitor, I could see Daniel pacing near the gate, his coat collar up, his movements the scattered, electric movements of a man who has stopped being strategic and started being desperate. Beside him was a taller figure, Broder, moving differently, slower and more deliberate, the way someone moves when they have decided that patience is a tool. Weston Security confirmed, Marcus Harmon, younger brother, a sealed assault charge from 7 years earlier. Then Daniel found the outdoor intercom. His voice came through the speaker, warped by static but unmistakably his Claire. I know you are in there. I want to talk. That is all. We can end this quietly if you just open the door. Owen stirred. Rachel held him tighter. Then Daniel said, I filed a conservatorship petition this afternoon. I have a judge's signature. You have until tomorrow morning to respond or it takes effect. He did not know it had already been dismissed. I looked at Rachel across the small room. She looked back at me. 2 women, sitting with a sleeping toddler between us, in a room with steel locks, listening to the voice of the man who had used both of our names for his own purposes. And I thought about how utterly ordinary it all was. How it happened in houses with lavender on the walkways and good coffee and wedding photographs on the bookshelf. How it did not look like danger from the outside. How the most dangerous structures are the ones that look the most solid. Outside, 3 black SUVs arrived silently, their headlights cutting through the November dark. Weston's full security team, 6 people in tactical gear, moving with the clean efficiency of people who have practiced for exactly this kind of moment. Daniel's voice on the intercom went from controlled to brittle, to something that broke apart entirely when the floodlights came on. You cannot do this. She is my wife. I have legal rights. This is illegal. What you are doing is... The senior security officer's voice came through the outdoor system. Daniel Harmon. Step away from the property now. Marcus moved first, toward the side of the building. Fast and purposeful. The security monitor flashed white, a sound like a hammer hitting metal, then a deep percussive boom that I felt in my chest before I heard it with my ears. The south wall, the basement window, a gas line. Owen woke up screaming, and through the camera, in the flickering orange light of what was now a fire on the south side of the building, I watched Daniel walk toward the front door. Not running, walking. The walk of a man who has passed through something and come out the other side of it and is no longer pretending. What happened in the next 4 minutes I have reconstructed from security footage, from the statements of 6 witnesses, and from the very clear memory I have of standing in a hallway with smoke curling under the door and my daughter moving inside me and a decision I had been building toward for 6 weeks finally arriving, fully formed, in my chest. The security team contained the fire on the south wall within minutes. The gas line had been partially damaged, not catastrophically. The boom was more structural shock than explosion. The wall held. Nobody in the building was physically harmed. Marcus Harmon was detained 2 blocks away in possession of a crowbar and a written note in Daniel's handwriting, describing the property layout and the location of the gas shutoff valve. Daniel reached the front door of the townhouse. Weston was already there. Daniel. His voice was steady. Not aggressive. The voice of a man who does not need to raise his volume to be heard. It is over. Daniel looked past him. Found my face. I was standing in the hallway, 10 feet back, both hands on my belly. Smoke still faint in the air. Claire, his voice was entirely different now. The performance had come apart. What was left underneath was something I had glimpsed in years of arguments and never fully seen. Fear, raw, stripped down. Animal fear, not of me. Of the consequences of himself. Please, I made mistakes. I know I made mistakes. But we can fix this. We can start over. Whatever you think you know, we can talk about it. I looked at him. I know about Sophie, I said. His face went white. I know about the AMA form. I know about Rachel. I know about Owen. I know about the account in my name. I know about the Meridian Project. I know about the house listing. I paused. I know about all of it. Daniel. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. And the conservatorship petition, I said, was dismissed at 7 a.m. this morning. Detective Whitfield from the Westport Police arrived at the front gate at that moment, followed by 2 state police vehicles. He had been briefed by Sandra. He had, in his quiet way, been waiting for the right moment. He was a methodical man. He did not rush. He walked up the path while 2 officers moved to secure the perimeter. He looked at Daniel the way you look at a math problem you have already solved and are simply writing down. Daniel Harmon, he said, you are under arrest for forgery of legal documents, financial identity fraud, intimidation of a witness, filing a fraudulent conservatorship petition, and conspiracy to commit property damage. Daniel took a step back, then another. Then the officers were beside him, and the handcuffs were on, and he was saying something. Words I could not fully hear. Something about how this was not what it looked like, how I had misunderstood, how he had been trying to protect me. He said my name once more as they walked him to the car. I did not answer. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes after something like that. Not silence, exactly. The world was still making noise. Cars, the security team's radio, Rachel's voice soothing Owen down the hall, the distant sound of the fire crew. But inside me, quiet. The kind of quiet that is not emptiness. The kind that has weight to it. Presence. The feeling of a space that has been occupied for a very long time by someone else's noise, and is only now, very slowly, becoming your own. Weston came to stand beside me. Not close. An arm's length. The distance of someone who understands the difference between presence and intrusion. You are all right, he said. Not a question. Yes, I said. Owen is fine. Rachel is in the kitchen. The paramedics want to check you over. In a minute. I said. I looked out at the driveway, at the November sky, lightening now toward dawn, at the place where my husband had stood 2 minutes ago, saying my name like a question he could not answer. I thought about the lavender on the walkway of the house in Westport. I thought about Sophie. I thought about the woman at the drafting table at 11:45 at night, 31 weeks pregnant, sketching plans for a project she had been told no longer existed. I thought, she was right all along. The instinct, the knowing, the quiet voice that said something is wrong. She was right the entire time. I whispered something. To myself, to my daughter, to the cold November air. I said, I see you now. Harper, it turned out, had saved everything. Every text, every email, every instance of Daniel telling her a version of their story that required Claire to be unstable, unreliable, temporary. She had saved it not out of calculation but out of the particular self-preserving instinct of a young woman who had slowly, over 18 months, begun to realize she was not in a story about love. She was in a story about convenience. She contacted Sandra on Monday morning. She came in with a folder. She sat across from a detective and she answered every question with the kind of exhausted honesty that comes from having carried something heavy for too long and finally putting it down. She was 23 years old and she had made choices I would not make. But she told the truth when it mattered, and the truth mattered enormously. And I have chosen not to spend any of my limited emotional energy on hating her for the choices that preceded it. Daniel's firm removed him from partnership within 48 hours of the arrest. The managing partner, a careful, reputation-conscious man named Graham, called Sandra directly to offer cooperation with the investigation. He was, Sandra said, extremely motivated to distance the firm from Daniel's conduct. He provided every internal communication they had. It was, she said, a significant amount. Rachel filed a new child support petition with proper legal representation. The petition moved forward without interference this time. The AMA discharge from 2 years ago was reviewed by the Hospital Ethics Board. The case was reopened. Dr. Shaw's note was entered into the official record. I did not press criminal charges for that specific incident. I made that choice deliberately, not because I had forgiven it. I am not there yet. But because my energy in those weeks needed to go somewhere more useful than backward, and because the civil case Sandra was building made the point with sufficient clarity. What Daniel did in that hospital with Sophie's life and my medical rights is documented now. It is real. It is on record. And some things do not need to end in handcuffs to constitute justice. Some things just need to be true, out loud, where no one can bury them again. My daughter was born on a Tuesday in January, just after midnight. 7 pounds and 2 ounces. Gray eyes, lungs that had opinions about the world from the first second she was in it. I named her Nora Sophie Bennett, 2 names for 2 women. The daughter I lost and the daughter I kept. And Bennett, my name before Daniel, my mother's name before her father. The name I had carried quietly through 8 years of being a Harmon and had never actually given up. My mother was in the room when Nora arrived. She had driven from Richmond the week after the arrest, brought 3 casseroles and a complete collection of my childhood books and the kind of practical, unwavering presence that mothers sometimes manage to offer exactly when you have stopped knowing how to ask for it. She held Nora first, after me. She looked at her for a very long time without saying anything. Then she said, "She has your hands." I looked. She was right. The long fingers, the slight leftward curve of the pinky. Draftsman's hands, my hands, her hands. We stayed at the Stamford property through February. Weston arranged it without being asked, and he did not make it complicated. He checked in occasionally, briefly. He brought flowers once, tulips in January, which is not easy to find. And he stayed for 20 minutes and asked about the baby's sleep schedule and whether I needed anything, and then left without manufacturing a reason to stay longer. I noticed this, the not staying longer. I filed it away as information. In late February, Sandra called with a settlement offer from Daniel's attorneys. I will not specify the amount, except to say that it included the equity in the house, restitution for the career interference, and a contribution toward the cost of the secondary account that had been running in my name. I accepted it, not because it was enough. Nothing is enough for Sophie. Nothing is enough for the years I spent doubting a voice inside me that was never wrong. But it was substantial. It was real. And it allowed me to stop thinking about money and start thinking about what I was going to build next. The answer was already waiting. Carol Sutton called in early March. The Meridian client was ready to move. The expansion project, $14 million. The next phase of the rooftop garden that had been designed by me and attributed to someone else and featured in a magazine I had not been able to bring myself to read, was beginning construction. And they wanted the original designer. They wanted me. I want to be honest with you about what I felt when I walked onto that rooftop on a March morning in New York City with Nora strapped to my chest in a carrier, asleep against my heartbeat, completely unbothered by the significance of the moment. I did not feel triumph. Not exactly. I felt something quieter than triumph and more lasting. Something that had to do with recognition. The feeling of a space that was always yours, that was taken from you, that you have returned to and found waiting exactly as you left it. Slightly dusty, entirely unchanged. Still yours. I stood at the north edge of the Meridian rooftop and looked out at the skyline, the city I'd spent years designing gardens for, the skyline where my work breathed, even when my name was not attached to it. Weston was there. He had come as the developer. He stood a few feet away, looking out at the same view, and after a while he said, "How does it feel?" I thought about the lavender in Westport. I thought about the guest room, where I had slept for 6 weeks documenting my own marriage. I thought about the parking garage at midnight, sitting in my car after 4 hours of hospital monitoring, deciding that I was done. I thought about Sophie. I thought about Nora, asleep against my heart. "It feels," I said, "like I always knew it would." He looked at me for a moment. Then he looked back at the skyline. "Good," he said. And we stood there in the March wind with the city below and the sky wide and pale blue above and my daughter between us, breathing slowly. And I thought, this is what it feels like to be exactly where you are supposed to be. Not because you were rescued, not because someone arrived and made the hard parts easy, because you documented the hotel receipts, because you copied the key, because you called Sandra before you confronted anyone, because you sat on the bathroom floor at midnight and you called the doctor, and then you drove yourself to the hospital and you talked to your daughter the entire way. Because when you sat on the floor and cried, you gave yourself 3 minutes. And then you stood up because you trusted the voice that said something is wrong, even when every system around you was designed to make you doubt it. Nora shifted in the carrier. Her fist opened against my sternum. She made a small sound that was not a complaint. Exactly, more like a statement. Like she was noting, for the record, that she was present, that she was here. I pressed my hand against her back. Steady and warm. "I know," I said quietly. "We stayed on that rooftop for a long time. Before I let you go, I want to say something directly. If you listen to this story and recognize something in it, a feeling, a pattern, a specific kind of silence that has been living in your house for longer than you can name, I want you to hear this. The voice that says something is wrong is not hysteria. It is information, and you are allowed to trust it. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. They have staff available around the clock who are trained in exactly this kind of situation. You do not have to be in physical danger to call. You just have to feel like something is wrong. And if you are sitting somewhere right now, on a bathroom floor or a guest room bed or a kitchen floor at 3 in the morning, I want to tell you what I told Nora on the Merritt Parkway at midnight. We are going to be fine. Not immediately. Not without difficulty. Not without 3 minutes on the floor first. But fine, the Stoics had a phrase. Amor fati, love of fate. Not because the suffering was good, but because the path through it was the only path that led here. To a rooftop in March. To a daughter named after the baby you lost. To a self you finally recognize. The things you survived were not detours. They were the path to the strongest version of yourself. You are already further along it than you know. Take care of yourselves. And thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. It matters more than I can say.